Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome to the Journal of Space Commerce podcast. I'm Tom Patton. One of the long-standing advocacy groups for space is Space Foundation, which was established in 1983 with the mission to advance the global space community through education, collaboration, and information. Space Foundation is perhaps best known for its research and analysis, space certification program, the Space Technology Hall of Fame, and its signature annual event, Space Symposium, which has been around for more than 40 years. Space Foundation operates across nearly every segment as a neutral convener. It doesn't build rockets, it builds the ecosystem around those who do. And my guest on this edition of the Journal of Space Commerce podcast is Rich Cooper, Vice President of Strategic Communications and Outreach at Space Foundation. And Rich, it's a pleasure to have you with me today.
Tom, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you and your audience.
Let's start out with your background because you've got a pretty impressive resume all through the industry. How did you get involved?
You know, again, I will say I've been blessed by encountering a number of persons who were mentors and encouragers throughout my career. And I'm fortunate to say I literally got to start my career with basically sort of a dream job. I was working as a contractor at NASA headquarters in 1990. And that was when people were starting to talk about this thing called commercial space, and working with what was then called the Office of Commercial Programs started to expose you to the ideas that what industry could do, what researchers could do partnered with industry. And so my career sort of unfolded working in a lot of those areas. And it took me through working with environmental technologies, remote sensing, all of that. I had the fortune of being able to see a full spectrum of what was going to happen with the commercial space community. And what's great is to be able to sort of grow with that community and see where it's at today. Took me to NASA headquarters after the Columbia accident, and working that, I went over to the Department of Homeland Security because at that point it was a mission that needed to, that is a mission we can't fail at for a lot of reasons. But I was fortunate to be able to bring a lot of my industry type of experience and NASA experience to DHS to help it start to develop relationships with persons who were using satellite imagery for remote sensing or using it for emergency management types of purposes. That was great. And again, my career has sort of progressed along there in working with persons in government and industry and space and public safety, all of that. I really feel I feel like I'm a utility infielder. I can do a lot of different things. I was a lousy little leaguer, but I feel like I'm a pretty good utility infielder on a lot of these issues.
So let's then talk about how Space Foundation has evolved in its 50 plus years of existence.
Well, I will correct you. We're not 50 yet. So I feel like, and we're not 49 and holding. we are in our early 40s. I'll say that. Space Foundation, when it started with a number of retired military leaders and industry persons who were working in the space community, basically in the Colorado Springs area. And one of the things that they saw was there needed to be a greater amount of dialogue and understanding between what was going on between government, industry, national security, research. And that's how the Space Symposium was born. And when it started, it was called the National Space Symposium. And over time, that became what it is today, which is the premier assembly of the global space community. When you can bring persons from around, certainly government and the civil sphere, the military community, research community, now we have the investment community. When you start to bring all of those persons together and bring their international counterparts, you've got a very exciting table of conversation and connection that happens. And that's what Symposium is every year. We're fortunate as the program has grown. We have grown along with the Colorado Springs community. We like to say that we make Colorado Springs the capital of the space world for that full week that full week in the spring. But we know, as important as that week is, it's the other 51 weeks where you've got to keep the communications and the relationships going. And we're fortunate with what Space Foundation has done with its education programs, with its research. We keep those conversations and relationships going while always looking to bring new people to the table.
Sounds like Space Symposium is sort of the Oshkosh of the space industry.
Oshkosh is one of those. We've heard, Davos of space. We've heard South by Southwest of space. What we're happy to call it is Space Symposium. And what makes Space Symposium unique is not just the people that come there, but I will say it's also the venue. We've been doing this in Colorado Springs from the beginning, and this is a community that has been a great partner with us from day one. As we've grown, they've grown, and they have worked with us every step of the way. The program now is literally over 2 campuses. We started at the Broadmoor. We're still at the Broadmoor, but now we engage Cheyenne Mountain Resort, and there are also some other sort of satellite types of locations that around the Colorado Springs area that we utilize for the Space Symposium program. It may be over several campuses, but it is one community and campus that we're trying to create that week.
So you had over 13,000 attendees this year. What does
Yes.
that tell you about kind of the health and the momentum of the industry right now?
I will say the health and momentum of the industry and the community is incredibly strong. But one of the things that was really exciting about this year is, while we have had missions go to the moon, different probes, different sensors that have orbited the moon and given us lots of different vantage points of it, we've never had a crewed mission in the history of Space Symposium that has gone around the moon. And so I will say we were in the wave of Artemis. The mission had literally splashed down the Friday before, as the program kicked off on Monday. And so I'll say we were very much in the glow of Artemis, that you had certainly NASA and the Canadian Space Agency there to, with an immense amount of pride. But it wasn't just them. It was ESA. It was the industry players. It was the primes. It was the community as a whole. And that was very, very special to be able to celebrate, because it was the first time the community was getting together post-launch, post-mission, post-splashdown. And when you can celebrate something like that, that this community has been looking for and wanted to do for a long time, and we've done it. And while there's the excitement and that glow, everybody is very open-eyed and clear-eyed about, we have a lot more work to do. There are some very ambitious things that the new NASA administrator has laid out for the future of the Artemis program. And we've got more countries joining the Artemis Accords. So it's great to be able to celebrate what we've achieved, but we're also getting busy on a lot more that has to be done.
So then what were people talking about kind of on the sidelines of the event? You always hear about, the Artemis, of course, is going to be the big topic of discussion pretty much in the halls. But what were some of the other things that were really getting people's attention?
I will say the state of relationships between international partners, who can do what, who is prepared to do what. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a lot of challenge that's going on in the world, and lots of debate and discussion about what those alliances are and what they may look like in the future. But what you also, I would say, saw is relationships that have been built over decades, literally decades of collaboration and cooperation on countless numbers of missions. Those relationships remain as strong today as they were before. And that's what gives, I would say, a great deal of energy to this community, that we know we can do hard things. We know it's going to take some challenge. We know that there are going to be some obstacles, but we know if together we can get there. Artemis II proved that when you have all of the various pieces that came together, and it all worked perfectly. And we know that we have to get it perfect if we're going to be successful on missions 3, 4, and so forth. The other thing on the side, I will say, is certainly what's going on in the national security space domain. We did have leaders from Space Force that were very forward-leaning in their comments about what the threats and the challenges are, but also, I will say, the expectations that they have in working not just with their allied partners, but with industry in being able to provide core services, core technologies, core breakthroughs. While the Space Force is part of a larger sort of military collaboration, certainly within the U.S. defense establishment, industry is playing a very critical role as a service provider. And I think that has been very well illustrated by what has happened in the Russia-Ukraine war, with everything from the use of Starlink to satellite imagery to, again, resilient communications, all of those particular things. Industry has enabled a lot, most, if not all of that to happen. And that's a key portion that I will say there's a greater acknowledgement across civil and military and other space sectors that this industry has really matured into being the value-added capability provider and partner that they've always wanted to be.
At Space Symposium, you were kind of immersed in the industry, but I'm sure you're familiar with the Inmarsat study from 2022 that found that a lot of people really don't see the value in space, or they just don't understand it, or they think that it's all Star Trek and Star Wars. You've got an outreach organization. Do you feel like that perception still persists in the general public?
Yes. And that is a challenge that we as a space community have to recognize and be much more aggressive storytellers about the value and the impact that space brings to daily life here on Earth. A day without space is a horrific day for us economically, from a national security perspective, from an infrastructure perspective. It literally is putting you back to maybe it's 1850. Maybe I'm even being generous with saying 1850 is where we would be. But if you were to take away all of the infrastructures that space is embedded with, from communications to public safety to education to secure financial transactions, take that all away, and you are basically left with not much, maybe a telegraph, if that. If there are even, phone lines that can do that anymore. Space is that web and is that network that is bringing every one of those infrastructures to bear and allowing them to provide more capacity to more citizens and countries and communities than ever before. We as a community have to do a better job in helping people to understand why space is part of their daily lives, the benefits it provides. And if you didn't have space, you wouldn't be having a lot of other things. From a personal standpoint, again, I don't think anyone who's ever gone to see their healthcare provider, there are space tools in that doctor's office that would not have been there had it not been for the space program. I think everyone knows somebody that probably has had a pacemaker or has had an MRI done or has had a sonogram. I mean, again, any of these types of tools have a space heritage, but because people don't know of that heritage, they just think it's just there and they take it for granted. And we have to be better space storytellers in explaining people why space is important to everybody.
And that doesn't take into account anybody who's ever fastened their shoes with a Velcro or used an electric screwdriver, a battery-operated screwdriver.
Well, again, battery-operated tools, again, go through that. Think of the weather report that you're getting. I mean, I think the most personal aspect of space that people have today, aside from walking around with their phone, is when they order a package from Amazon. Okay, you can track that package from beginning to end. And how are you doing that? You're doing it through GPS, you're doing it through satellites, you're doing it through a secure network, all of those things. Take that away, and you have no idea when your package is showing up. And that could be something that you need for a weekend project, or your kid's science project, your science project the next day that you're trying to find. That is a space relational aspect that I don't think people appreciate. And again, we all have to be better storytellers about the impact that space provides and the benefits it offers to everybody.
Yeah, otherwise you're just waiting for the Wells Fargo wagon to be coming down the street.
Right. Again, I don't know if we have as many horses to do a Pony Express anymore, but I can think of a lot of things that I think we all have respective paperwork in the course of our lives. I don't know if I'm necessarily looking for that to be delivered by horseback anymore. I would rather it being able to get through a secure transaction that a satellite system can provide.
Space Foundation, Rich, is dependent on funding that comes from the companies that you bring together at Space Symposium and otherwise. How do you avoid the conflicts of interest?
On that, we have said to our members from day one, we want to be that neutral convener, that neutral partner that can bring a lot of different views and perspectives to the table. If you don't, and again, this comes down to, it's a balance, and you have to make sure that what we are trying to do is give people a full aperture understanding of what is happening in the community on a particular issue. We know that there are persons who are, strident competitors in any number of different types of services, but we all recognize that they also share similar visions, be that for exploration or for the advancement of a technology. We want to make sure we provide that balance, that everyone can hear what everybody has to say without one sort of, I would say, running roughshod over the other. As a neutral convener, that is a responsibility, that is a stewardship, and it is something we take very, very seriously, because if you don't bring people to the table, you don't have an understanding of what else is out there. We at Space Foundation are committed to making sure that people have the information that they can make an informed decision, that we're dealing with the facts and the details that are pertinent to those conversations. And we're always going to be looking out for persons who can bring new voice and perspective to the table. That's a responsibility we take on and something we're very proud of.
I'm Tom Patton, and my guest on this edition of the Journal of Space Commerce podcast is Rich Cooper, VP of Strategic Outreach and Communications for Space Foundation. When we come back, Artemis, CLD, and Golden Dome. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Journal of Space Commerce podcast from Xterra Media. The Journal of Space Commerce is the only industry publication to offer in-depth coverage of the entire space commerce value chain, from the supply chain to satellite operations and terrestrial applications. If you're a decision maker or investor in the space commerce industry, or an executive who needs to know how space commerce touches your business, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. Of course, everyone is welcome. Your paid subscription will give you first access to premium articles and podcasts focused on the space value chain. From market analyses to regulatory developments and company spotlights, paid subscribers will find valuable data to help you make informed decisions. Just visit www.xterrajsc.com on Substack and help keep the Journal of Space Commerce the industry's only independent source for space commerce intelligence for business leaders.
Welcome back to the Journal of Space Commerce podcast. I'm Tom Patton, and my guest is Rich Cooper with Space Foundation. Rich, there have been some big changes in the Artemis program, and the new administrator, Jared Isaacman, has set some very ambitious goals. Are people really getting enthusiastic about space again like they were in the late 60s and early 70s when I was 10 years old and watching the first moon landing in 1969?
Well, I wasn't 10, but I was a very well-behaved child when that moon landing occurred. My mom said I didn't utter a peep when it happened because I was asleep in my crib. It wasn't quite one yet, but I was well-behaved, but do have memories certainly of Apollo 17 and Soyuz and Skylab and certainly Shuttle. I think the larger public has fallen in love again with the space program because you had 4 absolutely extraordinary crew members who were as everyday neighbors, be they Americans or Canadians or just everyday Americans around the world, that talked about themselves and the challenges that they have overcome. People fell in love with a crew that was talking, hey, we got a plumbing problem. Hey, my Outlook's not working. Hey, I'm looking out the stars, I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing this. Again, those may be trite, they may be trivial, but they're all part of everyone's life. And when you recognize that you've got people hurtling more than 200,000 miles away in a spacecraft that are still carrying some of those challenges with them and working through them. It lets people, it's a moment of hope, I will say, that, working together, we can do a lot of things, a lot of really great things. But as to people falling in love again, whether it's the 60s and 70s, I guess my challenge on that is the late 60s and early 70s, people started to sort of fall away from where the space program was. And because, well, the moon landings seemed to be, routine. And again, I think it'd be hard pressed to find persons who could name any of the crew members that are on board the International Space Station. We've been doing that for 25 consistent years, continuous human presence in space. And while space flight and space exploration should never be considered routine, it is always going to have tremendous risk. This is where, again, we have to be better communicators about the value added that space is giving to everybody's lives. The research that's being done on the International Space Station that's contributing to medical breakthroughs, the satellite systems that are being deployed that are connecting remote portions of the world that otherwise would not have any type of connectivity. We've got to be our own best advocates and our own best storytellers. And I think when people saw the crew and the Artemis mission the way they did, they took us along for the journey every step of the way, whether that be hope or heartbreak or whatever that may be. Boy, there was an incredible human dimension to that. And that, I think, cannot be underestimated. And that's one of those things that when we're going to go forward with the subsequent Artemis missions, I'm not saying that those crews have to be exactly like the 4 people we just saw. They shouldn't. They should be themselves. But every one of those crew members, I think, understands they have a responsibility in sharing that adventure because they recognize they are there in a very unique position that most people will never be in. But they know if they can share that with them, they know they're going to have that support. They know they're going to have that understanding, and they know that there is going to be energy for those missions to go forward. Those are things I think we have to build on.
But I think that, and it kind of just occurs to me that when the original Apollo program was going to the moon, those astronauts were essentially test pilots. They were military guys. They were flying an experimental spacecraft, for lack of a better word. Is it sort of like now, until actually they sent a geologist to the moon, that was like the first non-military pilot that went. Is it now just because there are more, that it's becoming more of a thing that almost anybody could aspire to at this point? And how much is social media going to play into that you can get a tweet from space?
I think social media and the advent, and I'm looking for my phone here right now, and I think the advent of this device has, the social media and the phone have totally revolutionized how the storytelling aspect that's going on with space. You mentioned about getting a tweet from space. You are having crew members that are up there that are sharing images on their Instagram pages about what life is like in space. I can think of an absolutely fabulous music video that was done to David Bowie's Major Tom.
Oh, yeah.
Done on the International Space Station. And that footage by itself, I think helped people connect that, there's people up there all the time and not realizing it. This is where I think the arts and storytelling come into play. And when you looked at how people use social media in the course of this mission to connect to the public was tremendous. But I'll add another aspect of that. Victor Glover's family and his daughters and what they were doing on social media and TikTok. How many kids out there can say their dad is flying out to the moon? And they were sharing all of the excitement as well as the concern of what they were going through. When we were going through the 60s, again, remember, it was a very, very tightly controlled image. It is the Life magazine. Everything is sunshine and apple pie. Well, we know life is not sunshine and apple pie all the time, nor was it then. But we've now have evolved as, I would say, as a species and as communicators to share what is happening along the way. Every one of these astronauts in their own particular way shared a vulnerability of what they had. They are not perfect. They have shared they're not perfect. They've shared what their challenges are and what they've encountered. And the fact that they've overcome them and moved forward is a piece of inspiration that people can carry with them, which is why when you look at the the persons who are selected for the future crews, they already know they've got to do that. And that doesn't mean that they have to be forthcoming with everybody. They certainly need to retain their privacy, but they also recognize, if I can share this, more people can do this, and more people are going to want to be part of it.
One more thing about Artemis, and I've got a couple other topics that I really want to get to, but there is some skepticism about the Artemis program because it's a big, expensive single-use rocket in an era that's increasingly about reusability. Can the Artemis program adapt, or should it adapt?
Yes. And I think what we've heard from the NASA administrator, this program is going to adapt. It is going to evolve into, again, what was first being talked about with Gateway is now becoming a moon base. We're making some other changes along the way. I have no doubt that reusability is going to be a huge portion for what is going to happen with Artemis. We know what the vehicles are going to be, with the exception of the moon lander, how we're going to do Artemis 3 and 4. But that doesn't mean that with advents of different technologies and different systems, that subsequent systems aren't going to be employed here. I think, as we've seen certainly through the Apollo program, and we'll see during Artemis, it is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, particularly when you have commercial industry that can provide so many different tools and technologies and concepts that weren't there before, it's exciting to see, when the administrator was talking about at Symposium, where when Artemis 3 goes up, it may be, test docking with 2 different moon landers. Okay. All right. That's some competition. Let's see. Is that going to be Starship, or is that going to be Blue? We don't know, but we're putting 2 companies that are putting their best and brightest on these problems to be able to execute, to see who can go to the moon next. That's good for taxpayers, that's good for the program, and it bodes well for the rest of the Artemis program, recognizing that we're going to be looking for competitive means and solutions to address every step of the way, which is where the NASA of old, while it certainly worked with industry, it did not have the value added game changers that today's NASA has with today's commercial space industry.
You mentioned that there was a lot of discussion about Golden Dome at Space Symposium. Why do you feel like that was such a major topic of discussion? And are we finally going to see some kind of realization of the Reagan-era Star Wars initiative?
This is where, again, I'll use the word transformation and evolution. A lot of the concepts that are being talked about within Golden Dome certainly have their roots with the Strategic Defense Initiative of the 80s. The talk on that, I think, the talk picked up on it because you were having Space Force leaders as well as other allied partners talking about the threat environment that exists out there and the challenges to infrastructures and architectures and operations. They were as candid as they could be in public sessions, talking about what those particular things are and what they're looking to do to mitigate those risks. That type of conversation, being, I would say, more forward leaning, has been very healthy for this community to understand certainly roles and consequences, but also defining what are the opportunities that industry and others can bring to the table to mitigate those threats, to address those types of challenges. That, I think, is something you're going to see more and more of. There's a very aggressive timeline that the administration has put forward on Golden Dome as to, first deployments. We saw this past week. They've started to award some of the contracts as to different vehicles that might be able to use to be part of a system like that. Because leadership has talked so overtly about these threats and they're putting forward a very aggressive timeline that they have to meet, you're going to have more discussion about this. And it is going to be not just, yes, it will be in classified settings, but you're going to be hearing a lot of other conversations that are going to be occurring in conference rooms with companies, recognizing what is the resilience of their system? What are they doing that could help Space Force or allied partners in mitigating what those types of risks are? So you're going to see more conversation than you are quiet on this. Because again, it's all the marbles. It is, as I shared earlier, a day without space is catastrophic, and we have to make sure that we protect all of those architectures and infrastructures.
How does that then fit in with Space Foundation's exploration heritage?
I think what you see, here's how it builds on it. I've used the word evolution and transformation a couple times here. It's the same thing here. Uh, Exploration is always a step into the unknown. But once you know something, it behooves you, and it is the absolute most responsible thing to do, is share what you've learned so that that next giant leap can occur. If you don't do that, you are not helping yourself or future explorers do that. Exploration is that thing that is embedded within our human DNA that allows us to open a door to see what's next. And everyone who's ever lived on this planet has looked up at the stars and wondered what else is out there. That is the first spark of an explorer. And when we see what happens with exploration, it is a means of inspiration for people of all ages, but particularly the young, to take up their roles and responsibilities in studying STEM disciplines, getting the skill bases that would allow them to be not just an astronaut, but a flight director, or maybe it is, someone who is welding the different pieces together, coming up with the code. No one goes to space alone. There are so many different jobs and opportunities. We want exploration as a means of showing that whole aperture of how people can participate in space.
Kind of along those lines, what role do you see for Space Foundation in the transition from ISS to the private space stations, particularly in light of the major restructuring of the CLD program?
This is where, we are on the eve of the era of the commercial space station. And while there certainly is some debate about whether the space station is going to be extended beyond 2030, or maybe some of these first commercial space stations will first lock on to the International Space Station and work there and be part of that for a brief period of time, that, I'll say test drive, if for lack of a better phrase. We're going to be able to see how we can move from what was really a NASA-driven type of vehicle to a NASA and international partner-driven vehicle, to how industry can offer, I'll say, more variety, more different types of experiences. Because every commercial space station that's out there, the only things that they're really sharing in common, they're sharing physical space up there. We know that they have to be able to maintain experiments. We know that they're going to have be able to have a means for a human to go into them every now and then. And again, there may be some shared architectures, but every one of those is a very different operational system. There are commonalities, but then there are differences that are going to allow countries and companies to have a choice, and choice provides options and opportunities. It's exciting to be able to see what these companies are going to offer, but it is also, we are building on the back of what is 30 years of working together with international partners. We've learned a lot along the way. Industry has been looking at those lessons, and just again, I'll use the phrase giant leap. They're going to take it that next giant leap so that they can move it all forward.
Speaking of giant leaps, let's talk about nuclear power for just a moment. Is that going to be the real game changer for long-term presence on the moon or Mars, and then on deeper into space exploration?
Absolutely. And what's interesting, if in listening to any of the respective Artemis partners, as this is all taking shape, there are lots of things that need to be defined about how missions are going to be shaped and operate and participants. Not all of those decisions have been made, but there is one decision that they have all been unanimous about, and that is nuclear power. Everybody recognizes that if you want to do the things that we are all aspiring to do in space, that is the only real means that we have to do that. And which is why the upcoming missions that NASA has to put a reactor on the moon to, again, take that giant leap and let's see what happens, is so critical. So nuclear power is an absolute cornerstone for anything that we're going to do for going forward, period.
Until I guess they come up with antimatter and dilithium crystals.
Until Montgomery Scott and his engineers are able to, find out where to mine those dilithium crystals. Yes, we are going to be doing nuclear power, and I'm sure Scotty, a century or so from now, will be looking at nuclear power as tantamount to a campfire. In the wilderness, because they will have something so much better. But this is where exploration and inspiration start. And this is what it gives. It takes you start with one step to move to the other.
One thing more, Rich, and that's if all the dominoes fall into place and NASA puts boots back on the moon in 2028, which is an ambitious goal, but it's possible. What then does space commerce look like in 2030, and what role do you see for Space Foundation in that realm?
What I think is exciting about where space commerce will be is, while we've got a lot of space commerce in low Earth orbit, okay, we've now just opened a highway between Earth and Moon. That's the cislunar economy. How big is that going to be? Don't know. What shape is it going to be? Not sure. But I think we have seen enough out of, I will say, it's not just space, but just over a period of time. Technology advancements and taking those next giant leaps to wherever it might be expands an economy, it creates jobs, it drives innovation, and I will say enables a creativity that entrepreneurs, and again, entrepreneurs are an incredibly special breed. Every one of them look at the world a different way, because some of them are going to see where there's a market opportunity and others are going to say, I'm going to pass. But they're all looking out there to do these types of things. When you open up that pathway between the Earth and the Moon, there are persons who are looking at that from a scientific means to a travel tourism means to a strategic types of means, any of the other expanded infrastructures that we need to go, geosynchronous, et cetera, let alone all of the exploration pieces that we want to do with telescopes like Webb and Nancy Grace Roman and everything else. You're going to have more and more ideas popping up from these entrepreneurs and coming forward. And damn, I think that is absolutely off the chart cool and exciting. Can I put a dollar figure on it? No, but I can tell you right now, we've already got over 90 countries operating in space today. You've got all the other countries that are looking to play a role, and everybody is looking to make that giant leap for themselves, because they know if they're there, they're there. If they're not part of it. And that's what I think is very exciting to see with 2030, how many different players are coming forward. And those players are not just countries, they're companies and they're partnerships. Sky's the limit.
We're going to have to leave it there. My guest has been Rich Cooper, Vice President of Strategic Outreach and Communications for Space Foundation. Rich, it's been fascinating. Thanks very much for talking with me today.
Tom, thank you for your time. Appreciate the questions and appreciate what you do with the journal. Keep it up.
We're going to give that a shot. That is going to do it for this edition of the Journal of Space Commerce podcast, which is available wherever you download your multimedia content. I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.
The Journal of Space Commerce podcast is a production of Xterra Media. The executive producers are Mike Turner and Tom Patton, with production assistance from Debbie Turner. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and many other popular podcasting platforms. Be sure to click subscribe so that you don't miss any of our podcasts or any of our other videos. The Journal of Space Commerce is the only industry publication systematically covering the entire space commerce value chain, from the supply chain to satellite operations and terrestrial applications. If you're a decision maker or investor in the space commerce industry, or an executive who needs to know how space commerce touches your business, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. Of course, everyone is welcome. Your paid subscription will give you first access to premium articles and podcasts focused on the space value chain. From market analyses to regulatory developments and company spotlights, paid subscribers will find valuable data to help you make informed decisions. Just visit www.xterrajsc.com on Substack and help keep the Journal of Space Commerce the industry's only independent source for space commerce intelligence for business leaders.